Hi guys, this is going to be a simple tutorial about game scenes, game objects and what some of their components do. To start, when opening Unity, I'm going to create a new project from scratch, so the scene and everything in the game is empty, so it's easier for you to follow. This is the Unity editor window. I will be calling it just Unity. I'm going to briefly explain first what some of these windows do, so you can follow if this is all new for you. I will be talking about some of these things more in depth in the future in other tutorials also, so don't worry. Simply explained, the game world is composed of scenes. You can think of the scenes as game levels. You need to have one open at a time. If we want to have a game object in the game, it will be existing inside the active scene. In the hierarchy, it shows all the objects that exist in the scene. For now, we only have the camera and the lighting of the scene. Game objects can also contain other game objects. So you can think of the scene as an infinite, unmovable object that contains other objects. The scene window is the one that we use when we are working on the game. This one allows us to move freely where we want when we are working on the game. And the game window, on the other hand, is whatever we will see when we are playing the game. We can move the camera in the world to frame what we want the player to see. We could even put the camera on the player, for example, to have a first-person view. We can create or delete game objects from the scene by adding or removing them from the hierarchy. To create a game object, we can right-click and create some basic shapes that Unity provides. Here, Cube 1 and Cube 2 are two different objects, and even if they are different objects, they can occupy the same space. That's why you only see one cube. Now I can put Cube 2 in the Cube 1 game object, making Cube 2 part of the first cube. This means that Cube 2 will be dependent of Cube 1, and if I move it or I scale it, Cube 2 will change as well. But it doesn't go the other way around. If I change Cube 2, Cube 1 remains the same. If you noticed, the new origin of coordinates for Cube 2 is the center position of Cube 1. And this position will be relative to Cube 1, while Cube 1's origin is still the scene's center. This is the absolute origin of coordinates. When we move objects on the hierarchy tree, now the object changes the value to adjust to the new reference of position, but they do not move in the world. In the hierarchy, we can create game objects, but we can also duplicate. We can remove game objects, and if we want to remove, but just temporarily, the object, and we don't want to delete it, we can just deactivate the object so it remains in the same position, but the object won't interact with the game anymore. Then, if we want to get the object back how it was, we just have to activate it again. We can also modify game objects on the inspector window, like the size and the position, for example. All these changes can be done to single objects or to multiple objects by selecting them together. All these objects are in the scene, but objects can also exist outside the scene. they can exist in other scenes, for example. If we make another scene, we can save the changes to our scene, and the changes that we can make in the new one won't affect the original scene. Another way that the game objects can exist is by being independent from any scene. Game objects can simply exist by just being part of the project. These are called prefabs, and then they can be placed in the scenes or even not be in any scene at all. Prefabs can be easily distinguished in scenes because they are blue in the hierarchy. If an object is gray, it means it only exists in the current scene, and if we delete it, it will disappear from existence, unlike the prefab that will exist in the project files. The prefab object being independent from the scene means that if we open it, by opening it directly from the project window or by clicking on the arrow, and we modify it, the changes will carry on to all the game objects made out of the prefab in all the scenes that the prefab is in. When we modify a prefab on its own, the changes to it are saved immediately. So when we save, we are saving only in the scene. The changes to the prefab are independent from the scene. When I'm working and modifying changes on a prefab, what I like to do is to unpack the prefab in the scene, so I can work on it without having to worry about messing up the existing one. And once I'm satisfied with the changes, I make the game object a prefab again, by dragging it to the project folder. It's better to finish working on the prefab before you put it on different scenes, because if you change it, you will have to manually insert the prefab in the other scenes that you already have it. There are many other game elements that can exist outside the scene apart from game objects, like for example materials. All the files that are part of the game are in the project folder. These files can be created directly in Unity, or they can be exported from other programs. The usual thing to do is to import the game assets in Unity, but Unity is not the best tool to create the game content, but rather the place where you gather all the different game assets and compose the scenes to create the game levels. Okay, so let's start creating objects. First, we make a game object by right-clicking on the left tree, and here you can see the different objects we can make with Unity. The simplest game object that we can make is an empty game object. This game object just exists. If we check on the inspector, all we can see is where the object is in the scene, because it has the transform component. The components are the attributes or the characteristics of a game object. For example, if we create a game object with a body this time, this one will have a mesh component. We can see the mesh or the body of the object because it has the render component also. If we want the object to be a physical object, then we can add the rigid body component. Some components can be modified depending on how we want the object to behave. The physical interaction is done because of the object's collider, not its mesh. So for example, if we want the object to collide where we see the object, we will have the same shape for the collider. But we could as well have a different size . Or we could even give it a different shape from the render mesh. The collider can also be used as a trigger rather than a physical wall. These will help us trigger events. For example, the player could be damaged if we enter this volume. This is a very useful tool to make things in the game react to each other. So that's it for this first proper Unity tutorial. Even if all of this is very simple, it is important to understand how the game objects work to know why objects react how they do when making the game. I hope this tutorial was useful, and who knows, maybe it even helped you get inspired to create a game based on this physics. I know when I first saw these interactions, my brain started thinking of all the possibilities and possible games I could do just with this simple stuff. If you guys have any comment, please leave it down there. That will actually help me know if you guys found this video useful. And if you guys are interested in videos of how to make a game, subscribe so you get to see more videos like this. So see you in the next video, bye!